We're now almost in a position to have some fun and make another app. There's one thing that I want to show you before we do, and that's how to generate a random number. So with our higher or lower app, we're going to want people to guess a random number that the phone is going to produce. So we need to know how to generate a random number. So let me show you how to do that now. I'm going to create a new file and save it as random number. So we've got some compilation errors because we haven't imported our hello world yet, but that's fine. And then let's just put our code in the usual place. So to create a random integer, so a random whole number, we use the random type or random class, and we're going to call this a random generator. So this is not quite the random number itself, it's a random number generator. And this is going to be a new, so that keyword that we saw before, and it's going to be of the random class. So this setup is quite important and reasonably good to get clear in your mind what's going on here. So this random is a class, which remember is a template for something, like our ghost template for creating a lot of ghosts. So our random generator that we've just created is a new instance or a new object of the template random. So the random is the template that gives random generator all of its power, essentially. So specifically the power to generate a random number. So how do we get it to do that? Well, we create our random number. So let's use random number to represent that. And then we use our random generator. And because this is of the class random, we're going to be able to use the method nextInt, which essentially just creates another random integer. And we could use that as many times as we like to generate a random number. The one variable that we need to put into the nextInt method is the range. So we want to decide what range of numbers we want a random number between. And it always goes between 0 and 1 less than the number you put in. So for example, if I put a 5 there, this will give me a random number between 0 and 4, which is slightly strange maybe, but there's 5 different possibilities for that number, 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4, so that maybe kind of makes sense. But anyway, that's how it works. So if you put in a 5 there, you'll get a random number between 0 and 4. So let's just check, make sure that that's behaving as it should. Print line and random number. There is actually one thing I'll need to do before we run that, and we'll need to import java.util. Now I could use .star, but specifically I only need one, and that's .random this time. So we'll minimize what we need to import and just import what we need. So let's take a look. What random number we're going to get? Okay, we've got a 0. Let's just run it again just to make sure. There we go. You can see we are getting pretty random numbers there. Fantastic. So just a quick challenge for you. Can you figure out how we could take this code and generate a random number between, say, 10 and 20? So between 10 and 20. Go for it. I hope you managed that. It's not quite as easy as you might think. We definitely don't want anything like that, because that would give us a random number between 0 and 19. So between 10 and 20, there are 11 numbers. You can count them yourself: 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. That's 11 different numbers. So we're going to want a random number generator between 0 and 10, which is what this will produce. And then we're just going to want to add 10 to that. So this part here will give us a random number between 0 and 10. And then if we add 10 to that, we'll get a random number between 10 and 20. Simple as that. Hope you figured it out. If we take a look at that, 15, looking promising. There we go. So that's how we generate random numbers. That's pretty much everything you need then to do this next challenge. So let me just save that. So let's jump over to Android Studio just to get you started. And here we are. I've got the currency converter app here, just to kind of remind you how it all works. It's been a little while since you've played in Android Studio, so just to remind you, we've got the main layout area here, and that's in the design tab, generally speaking, and then our code is over in main activity.java, and you'll be using toasts here as well as some of the code that we covered in the previous section. So our higher or lower app is going to be very simple. When the user loads the app is going to choose a random number, and then it's going to invite the user to guess that random number, and then the user will enter a number, and then the app will say either higher or lower, or you've got it right, depending on which one it is. So nice and simple, but it will give you an opportunity to use most of the Java that you've learned just now, and also to remind you how everything fits together in an Android app. So there's definitely nothing that you need from me to be able to do this, but of course, if you want to follow along on the video, you're very welcome. Best of luck. Hope it goes well. All right, here we go then. I'm going to do my usual file new and new project. Call this higher or lower, and leave everything else the same. Here we go. So I'm thinking about the layout. We're going to need a label of some sort to tell the user what to do, and then a input for them to put their number in, and then a button for them to check whether or not it's higher or lower. That's all we'll need, I think, in terms of a layout. If you want to put a nice pretty picture like we did on the currency converter app, then you're very welcome to, but I'm not going to here. Here we go. Okay, so we can get in as soon as it's ready. So I'm going to use the text view that's already there. So let's change the text here to, I've chosen a random number, exclamation mark. And I'll pop an ID in there as well. I'll just call that info text. Now it might be friendly to tell the user the limits of the random number. You might want to just keep it completely random, but I'm going to say between 0 and 20. There we go. And let's just change the text size there. See how 20sp looks. I think maybe a bit bigger. Nice. Okay, let's have another one. That just says, can you guess it? Call that guess text. And this one will make maybe slightly bigger. There we go. And I might even position that a bit differently. Okay. Then we need a text field. I'm going to choose a number text field for the user to enter the number. There we go. And as before, I'm going to change the width to match parent. So it's full width. And let's double click. And we'll call it guessed number. There we go. So that's where the user is going to put their number. And finally, we need our button. I'll pop that there. and change the text to guess. There we go. And the last thing that we need while we're here is to set the onClick method there, which is going to be check guess, because that's what we want the system to do when the user presses that button. Okay, so that's everything we need on the design side. Let's jump over to mainActivity.java to write our code and create our check guess method. So remember, public, because we want it to be accessible from anywhere in the app. Void, because it's not going to return anything. And then it's called check guess. It's going to be called with a view, which is going to be the button, but we'll just call it lowercase v view. And then it will contain our code. And it's reminding us that we need to put Android view in there. So let's do that. There we go. Now, because I like to check things as I go along, I'm going to save something to the logs. And as we've been using system.out.println for the last few videos, let's use that and see where it pops up in Android Studio. So we'll launch our emulator and we'll use the same device for future app launches as well. Here we go. Just going to swipe up to unlock there. There we go. So it's looking good. I'm very happy with the layout there. And if we just tap guess, we get button tapped. Fantastic. So notice that using the system.out.println command still displayed on our logs there. So we can either use the Android log command or we can use system. All right. So our next challenge is going to be to create our random number. And if you remember, with the random number, we need to create a generator first and then the random number itself. Now, the place that I want to create my random number is in the onCreate method down here. You may remember that this method runs when the app is run itself, and that's when we want to choose our random number. Obviously, we don't want to choose a random number every time the user taps a button, otherwise it'll be reset every time and they won't be able to guess it. So the obvious thing would be to create our random number here. So let's just start by doing that, and then we'll see why we need to move our code slightly. So you'll remember we create a variable called random. We need to put java.util.random in there. And again, we'll call it random generator. And that's going to be a new random. Okay, that's all good. Then we'll create our integer, which is going to be our random number. And that's going to be a random generator dot next int. And I said a random number between 0 and 20, so I need to put 21 there. And then our semicolon. Now that's all well and good, and this will indeed work, but if I try and use the variable random number here, you see it's not auto-predicting. And that's because of something called scope. And scope defines where a variable is accessible from. So here I've created my random number integer in the onCreate method, which means it's not accessible from the check guess method up here. So if I want my random number to be accessible from here, I need to move the definition here. And this makes it what's known as a global variable, and then it will be accessible from any method within this class. So I can now use random number is equal to random generator.nextInt21. So just to recap what we've done there, I've now created random number here before any of the code for the particular methods, and then I've defined, or I've set it to a value on create, so when the app itself is actually run. And now if instead of button tapped I enter random number, we should find that when the button is tapped, it prints the random number to the logs. It won't reset it and make it a new random number. It'll only do that when the app is run, which is exactly the behavior that we want. So let's take a look. So if we tap the button, there is our random number. And if we tap it again, we'll get the same number. So if you want to test it at this point and rerun it again, just to make sure you get a different number, then feel free. But I'm pretty confident that that is indeed a random number. So we've set up the random number that the user is trying to guess. Now we need to get the value of the actual guess that the user has made. So you may remember we use edit text, and I'll use guessed number as I did before, and that's going to be equal to the find view by ID, and then you remember we use R for resources.id and then guessed number. And you'll hopefully remember again that this is going to be a view and we want it to be an edit text. So we use edit text in parentheses to convert that. There we go. Then we need to get the value of that. So that's going to be a string. So let's create a string. I'll call it guessed number string. Is going to be guessed number dot get text, and then we just need to convert that to a string. So that will be the string value of what the number is. However, we're going to want to compare that to the number itself, the random number, which is an integer. So we need to convert this to an integer. So this is one tiny function that we haven't seen before. If you manage to find it, then well done. I'm going to use int and then guessed number int. And to convert to a integer from a string, we use integer dot parse int. And that just converts the string to a number, and the string, of course, is guessed number string. There we go. So finally we've got the number, and for now let's just display that in the console just to make sure that this bit's working okay and it is converting the number that the user guesses to an integer. Let's take a look. So if I put 5 in there, guess 5. Fantastic, looking good. Great. Okay. So now it's just a matter of checking whether the random number is higher or lower or equal to our guessed number. So let's take a look. So if guessed number int is greater than random number, Now here we want to set a message for the user, so we can do that with a toast. So toast.makeText, and remember we need the context, so get application context, and then here we'd say something like too high, and then we'll have toast.lengthLong for our length, and then show. There we go. So that's what we're going to do if it's too high. Another option is if guest number int is less than random number. Now here I could write out all of this code again, but I don't really want to have this toast command 3 times, because then if I want to change something about it, I have to change that each time. So I think a smarter way of dealing with it is creating a variable which we might call message, which is initially empty, and then instead of doing the toast there, we do the toast at the end of the if statement, and we use message to display our toast, and then in the if statement we just alter the message variable depending on whether the number guessed is too high or too low or exactly right. And that just makes our code a little bit easier to follow and easier to update if we want to later on. So here message is going to be too low. And the only other option is that we've got it right. So we'll set the message equals correct. Well done. Okay, so that should do exactly what we want it to. Let's take a look. Here we go. So maybe I'll start by guessing 5. Too low. Okay. 10. Still too low. 15. Too high. Okay, we're narrowing it in. 13. Still too high. 12. Still too high. So I think it must be 11. Correct. Well done. Fantastic. So this now works exactly as we wanted it to. There are 2 possible improvements, I think, that I'm going to set as challenges for you that you can do if you want to. The first one, and relatively easy one, is to change the random number when the user gets it right. So at the moment, you can only really play once, and then you have to quit the app again and run it again to play again, which isn't great. So it'll be fairly straightforward to just change the random number when the user guesses it right, and maybe change the message to correct, well done, try again, or something like that. So that's your easy challenge. The tough challenge, and one that we'll see how to solve later on in the course, is what happens if the user doesn't enter anything. So at the moment, if we click guess there, we get a crash, which is a disaster. And that's because we're trying to convert an empty string to an integer, which obviously doesn't work. We can't convert an empty string to an integer. We can only convert a string with a number in it to an integer. So you'd need to have some kind of a test here to test whether or not there is a value, and if there is, then go ahead and check. If not, maybe show the user to enter a number. So those are my 2 challenges to you. Neither of them are that difficult, so I definitely give them a go if you can. But overall, we've got our higher or lower app working, and now it's time to jump back into our Java code and learn how to do something called loops.